The courtroom of the Harrington County Superior Court smells like mahogany and consequence. Every detail has weight here. The high ceilings with their crown molding, the windows through which afternoon light falls in long, indifferent columns, the polished gallery benches packed with faces wearing expressions ranging from curiosity to outright satisfaction. And in the middle of all that weight, Eleanor. She sits at the plaintiff's table completely alone. No attorney, no family member leaning in to whisper reassurance, no hand at her shoulder, no folder of reinforcements. Just Eleanor Voss-Kincaid, straight-backed, pearl brooch catching the light, hands folded on the table in front of her as if she is quietly praying over the grave of everything she once believed her life would be. Across the aisle, the defendant's table is a different universe entirely. Richard Calloway sits surrounded by an army. Diana Cole, his razor-sharp attorney, arranges documents with the confidence of a woman who has already written the verdict. 2 junior associates flank her. Richard's business partner, Gerald Fitch, sits just behind the bar with a smug, satisfied tilt to his chin. And Margaret Calloway, Richard's mother, sits in the front row of the gallery directly behind her son, wearing cream Chanel-like war armor, her eyes fixed on Eleanor with the barely concealed delight of a woman who has waited years for this particular moment. Richard catches Eleanor's eye across the aisle. He smiles. Not kindly. Not even cruelly in the dramatic sense. He smiles the way a man smiles at something he has already discarded. Dismissive. Almost bored, as if her presence in this courtroom is a mild inconvenience he will resolve before dinner. He leans toward Diana and says something in a low voice. Diana's mouth curves. In the gallery, someone laughs quietly, a sound like a stone dropped in still water. Eleanor does not flinch. She looks forward. At the empty judge's bench, at the seal of the court mounted above it, she breathes in through her nose with the careful precision of a woman measuring every breath because she knows she cannot afford to waste a single one. Her hands remain folded, her eyes remain dry, but beneath the surface of that extraordinary stillness, she is holding herself together with both hands. Judge Patricia Holt settles into her chair, and the courtroom comes to a formal kind of attention, papers shuffling, throats clearing, the gallery growing quiet with the particular hungry anticipation of people who have come to watch someone suffer elegantly. Diana Cole rises immediately. She is all precise angles and weaponized confidence, a woman who learned to perform dominance in law school and has never stopped performing it since. Your Honor, Diana begins, her voice carrying like a practiced instrument. Before we proceed, I'd like to note for the record that the plaintiff appears to be representing herself today. Again. She pauses. Lets that word again settle over the room like a fine mist of condescension. This is the 3rd continuance the plaintiff has requested, citing the need to secure representation. We would submit, Your Honor, that the plaintiff's continued inability to retain counsel speaks directly to the merits, or rather the lack thereof, of her position in this matter. Eleanor stands. Your Honor, I am prepared to proceed. Her voice is measured. Quiet in the way that deep water is quiet, not because nothing is moving beneath the surface, but because the surface has chosen not to betray it. Judge Holt looks at her carefully over the rim of her glasses. Ms. Voss-Kincaid, the court is aware you have declined to retain an attorney. You understand that the opposing party is represented by experienced counsel and that this places you at a significant procedural disadvantage? I understand, Your Honor. A murmur from the gallery. From behind Richard, Margaret Calloway leans toward the woman beside her, an old family friend, sharp-nosed, wearing too much perfume and too much satisfaction, and whispers something that makes the woman's mouth compress into a thin, delighted line. Richard straightens in his chair, adjusts his cufflinks. He is performing generosity now, the magnanimous victor willing to allow the formalities to play out because he already knows how this ends. Diana proceeds. Over the next 40 minutes, she constructs a narrative about Eleanor with the careful, practiced cruelty of someone who has dismantled people for a living. She presents documents, financial records, correspondence, a carefully edited version of the last 3 years of Eleanor's marriage, and frames each piece of evidence with language designed not just to argue against Eleanor's legal position, but to diminish her as a person. Words like unstable, isolated, dependent. Words assembled like a cage around a woman's identity. The plaintiff, Diana says at one point, gesturing toward Eleanor with a hand that barely acknowledges her physical existence, has presented no credible financial records of her own, no independent legal counsel, no supporting witnesses present in this courtroom, and no documentation to contest. The prenuptial agreement she willingly signed. What she has presented, Your Honor, is a sympathetic story. And with respect, this court deals in facts, not sympathetic stories. In the gallery, Margaret Calloway nods with visible satisfaction. Gerald Fitch, Richard's partner, crosses one leg over the other and checks his phone, as if this is a foregone conclusion, as if Eleanor is already gone. The court-appointed mediator assigned to the case, a small, harried man named Peterson, shuffles papers and avoids Eleanor's eyes. Even his body language has capitulated on her behalf. Eleanor is called to address the court. She stands again. She speaks clearly, carefully, with a precision that catches Diana off guard, legal language, specific citations, a command of the procedural landscape that contradicts everything about the picture being painted of her. For a moment, something shifts in the room. Judge Holt leans forward almost imperceptibly. But then Diana rises with a counter-argument so surgically prepared that it dismantles Eleanor's points before she can fully develop them, and the momentum shifts back. Richard watches Eleanor with those cold steel blue eyes, and for just one moment something flickers across his face. Not guilt, not recognition, contempt. He looks at her the way you look at a door you have already closed. And in the gallery, someone, a woman Eleanor has never seen before, takes out her phone and begins filming. Eleanor sees this. She says nothing. She sits back down, alone. What the courtroom does not know, what Richard Calloway, in all his meticulous preparation and armored confidence, has catastrophically failed to understand, is that Eleanor Voss-Kincaid was never, in any meaningful sense of the word, ordinary. Her full name before marriage was Eleanor Constance Voss. And the Voss name, in the world that matters, in the world of old money, of quiet, generational empire, of the kind of wealth that doesn't announce itself because it has never needed to, the Voss name is a different category of existence entirely. Harold Voss, her father, built the Voss Group from the bones of his own father's regional manufacturing company into a global conglomerate spanning 32 countries, 4 continents, interests in energy, infrastructure, private equity, and defense contracting. He was not a man who appeared on television or attended charity galas with visible enthusiasm. He preferred the boardroom to the ballroom. He preferred results to recognition. The Financial Times had called him, in a piece published 7 years ago, the most powerful man you've never heard of. Harold had read the piece over breakfast, made a small sound of approval, and returned to his eggs. Eleanor grew up inside that world. Not spoiled, never spoiled. Because Constance Voss, her grandmother, had made absolutely certain of that, but formed by it. Educated at Oxford. Fluent in 4 languages. A brief, extraordinary career in international law before she met Daniel Kincaid, a good man, a genuinely good man, and chose love and a different life. Daniel Kincaid had died 18 months ago, a sudden cardiac event at 51. And the legal chaos that followed his death, Richard Calloway's attempt to seize assets from Daniel's estate that Eleanor was rightfully owed, the disputed business partnerships, the forged prenuptial agreement that bore Eleanor's signature on a document she had never signed, all of it had begun to unravel Eleanor's carefully rebuilt world. She had told her father. Of course she had told him. Harold had listened. And then he had said, with the particular quiet of a man whose quietness means everything. "Tell me what you need." And Eleanor had said something that surprised even him. "I need to do this myself first. I need them to see who I am before they see who you are. Because if you walk in on day one, no one will ever know what I'm made of. And I need to know it too." Harold had been silent for a long moment. And then, how long? As long as it takes for them to believe they've won. Her grandmother Constance, sitting in the corner of Harold's study like a small, ancient empress, had looked at Eleanor over the rim of her reading glasses and said simply, "Good girl." This was Eleanor's strategy, not desperation, not abandonment, not the tragic isolation the courtroom believed it was watching. It was architecture. Every painful day she spent alone at that plaintiff's table was deliberate. Every moment she allowed Diana Cole to diminish her, every moment she endured Margaret Calloway's theatrical contempt, every moment Richard Calloway looked at her with those discarding, dismissive eyes, she was building something. She was building the height from which they would fall. Because Eleanor Voss had learned something fundamental from her father, from her grandmother, from years inside a world where power is never performed loudly until the precise moment performance becomes necessary. Never reveal your hand until the pot is too large for them to walk away from. And the pot was nearly large enough. She had spent 6 weeks in this courtroom alone, filing her own motions with the precision of the international lawyer she once was, building a procedural record so meticulous that any competent appellate court would recognize its architecture immediately. She had requested 3 continuances, not out of weakness, but to allow James Kincaid, Daniel's business partner, the one man who knew exactly what Richard had done, to complete the forensic financial audit that would make Diana Cole's carefully constructed narrative collapse like a paper brick in rain. And she had given her family a signal, not a phone call, not a text. A signal they had agreed upon weeks ago, communicated through a source Richard's people would never think to monitor. The signal had been sent this morning. Eleanor folded her hands on the table and breathed through her nose with precise, calibrated calm. They were coming. She didn't know exactly when. But they were coming. And when they arrived, everything would change. By early afternoon, Richard Calloway is in his element. Diana Cole has moved through her evidence like a conductor reaching the final movement of a symphony she has rehearsed to perfection, each document presented with clean efficiency, each argument landing with the satisfying thud of something that cannot be countered, or so it appears. Richard sits with one arm draped over the back of his chair, a posture his mother taught him, deliberately, because it communicates ownership of space, watching Eleanor with eyes that have grown comfortable with victory. He has begun, quietly, to enjoy himself. Defense would like to submit Exhibit 34, Diana says, holding up a document with a burgundy folder tab. A correspondence from the plaintiff to her own financial advisor dated 14 months prior to Mr. Kincaid's death, in which she explicitly acknowledges the terms of the prenuptial agreement as binding. Eleanor looks at the document. Her expression does not change. But her fingers, just barely, press more firmly against the table. She recognizes that letter. She also knows it has been selectively excerpted. 3 paragraphs are missing. 3 paragraphs that would entirely reverse its meaning. She writes a careful note to herself on the yellow legal pad in front of her. Diana watches her write and smiles. She thinks I'm scrambling, Eleanor thinks. Good. In the gallery, the whispers have grown more comfortable, the way whispers do when people believe the outcome is secured. Margaret Calloway has produced a small notebook and is writing in it, likely drafting her statement for the press, Eleanor thinks. Margaret has always lived 12 steps ahead of the narrative. Richard's phone sits on the table beside him, screen discreetly angled, not entirely discreetly, since Eleanor can see from across the aisle that there are messages arriving. From Gerald. From investors probably already anticipating the asset transfer. They are celebrating in real time, Eleanor observes. She finds this clarifying. It is then 2:17 in the afternoon, according to the clock on the mahogany-paneled wall, that the first subtle disruption occurs. One of the court officers near the main entrance shifts his weight, looks toward the corridor, exchanges a glance with the officer at the door. A small thing, invisible to everyone absorbed in the drama at the plaintiff and defendant tables. Eleanor notices. Her hands remain folded. But something moves through her amber eyes, just briefly, like a single frame of color in an otherwise monochrome film, before the stillness returns. Outside, somewhere beyond the courtroom's heavy wooden doors, there is the sound of footsteps. More than one set. Measured, deliberate, unhurried footsteps. Richard is speaking now. He has been invited to address the court directly, and he is performing sincerity with practiced ease. His voice low and regretful, his eyes aimed carefully at Judge Holt with an expression of manufactured sorrow. The footsteps grow marginally louder. The court officer at the rear entrance reaches for his radio, then lowers it, then looks through the narrow glass panel in the door, and goes very still. Eleanor breathes. Not yet. At 2:34 in the afternoon, Diana Cole requests a brief recess. Judge Holt grants it. 5 minutes. The gallery exhales. People stand, stretch, check phones, murmur to each other with the comfortable looseness of an audience that believes the intermission is just a formality before a predetermined conclusion. Richard rises immediately and turns to his mother in the front row. Margaret extends her hand through the bar. He takes it, squeezes it, and in that gesture, that small, proprietary, victorious gesture, Eleanor sees the entirety of her marriage reflected back at her. The Calloway world, closed like a fist, squeezing everything else out. She remains seated, alone at the table. Peterson, the court mediator, walks past her and does not make eye contact. The junior associate from Diana's team accidentally, or perhaps not accidentally, knocks a folder off the edge of the defendant's table near Eleanor's side of the aisle. Papers scatter. The associate retrieves them with a murmured sorry that carries no sincerity whatsoever and moves away. Eleanor reaches over, picks up a page that has landed near her foot, places it quietly on the edge of the defendant's table. Nobody thanks her. In the gallery, the woman who had been filming earlier on her phone leans over to her companion and says something that makes both women laugh. Eleanor hears it. She does not turn. She looks at the courtroom seal above the empty judge's bench. Truth, justice, integrity. 3 words pressed into gold against dark wood. She has been staring at those words for 6 weeks. She has been having a private, unspoken conversation with them every single day she has sat alone at this table, and she wants very much to believe they mean something. Her hand moves, unconsciously, to the pearl brooch at her collar. Her mother's brooch. Her mother, who died when Eleanor was 11, who had soft hands and amber eyes and used to press her palm flat against Eleanor's chest when Eleanor was frightened and say, "Feel that? That's the strongest thing in this room." Eleanor presses her own hand against the brooch, feels the cool smoothness of the pearl beneath her fingertips. And in this moment, in the middle of the recess, in the middle of the humiliation, in the middle of the loneliest she has ever been in a room full of people, she looks, for just one visible second, like she might break. Her throat moves. Her eyes, those deep amber eyes, feel. Not with tears that fall, just the feeling, the brimming, the private flood held back by nothing more than will. She closes her eyes, opens them, breathes. And in the corridor beyond the heavy wooden doors, a sound, like the distant approach of a different kind of storm entirely. The recess ends. Judge Holt has returned to the bench. The gallery has resettled. Diana Cole has reorganized her burgundy folders with the meticulous satisfaction of someone loading a final round of ammunition. Richard is at the defendant's table, straightening his cufflinks again, left then right, and preparing himself for what he has already decided is the closing chapter of a story that ends with Eleanor Voss-Kincaid walking out of this courthouse with nothing. "We'll resume," Judge Holt says. "Miss Cole, I believe you had additional exhibits to submit." Diana rises, opens her mouth, and the courtroom doors open. Not violently, not with drama in the cheap theatrical sense. They open the way tidal waves begin, not with noise but with a fundamental and irreversible change in the nature of the air in the room, both doors, simultaneously. Held by two court officers who have inexplicably stepped aside, not because they were instructed to, but because something in the approach of these particular people communicated. Wordlessly and without ambiguity, that stepping aside was the appropriate response. The first person through the door is Oliver Voss, Eleanor's brother. He is broad and deliberate, and he walks the way their father walks, like the floor already belongs to him, and he wears a navy suit with a white pocket square, and his jaw is set so precisely that it looks architectural. He does not look at Richard. He does not look at Diana. He looks only at his sister. And when their eyes meet across the courtroom, Eleanor Voss-Kincaid's composure cracks, just barely, just for one exquisite second, not into grief, but into something that looks like a woman discovering that gravity still works when she had begun to suspect it. Might not. Oliver moves to the left wall, stands, clasps his hands in front of him, holding position. Behind him, moving with the unhurried precision of someone who has never in 88 years needed to rush to establish her authority, comes Grandmother Constance Voss. She is small. She is ancient. She is wearing a dove-gray wool coat with a black velvet collar and carrying her silver-tipped cane, and every tap of that cane against the marble courtroom floor lands in the sudden silence like a gavel. Tap, tap, tap. The gallery does not murmur. The gallery does not move. Constance walks to the plaintiff's side of the gallery, first row, directly behind Eleanor's table. She lowers herself with careful dignity into the seat. She places both hands on top of her cane. And she looks at Eleanor with those amber eyes, Eleanor's eyes, the family eyes, the eyes that have watched empires built and wars weathered and every species of human cruelty survived, and she nods. One small, absolute nod, and Eleanor, who has held herself together across 6 weeks of public dismantling with extraordinary and heartbreaking grace, has to look away, because the love in that nod is almost more than she can hold. Behind Constance come two more figures, James Kincaid, Daniel's business partner, who is no longer clutching his files nervously, but carries them now like weapons with both hands free, walking with purpose to the plaintiff's table, and beside him, a woman in a charcoal. Blazer, whom the room does not recognize, but whose presence has an unmistakable professional weight. The woman sets a briefcase on Eleanor's table, leans down, and says 3 words quietly in Eleanor's ear. Eleanor nods. The woman straightens. And then, Harold Voss walks through the door. The courtroom does not gasp. It does something more interesting than gasp. It goes completely, utterly, profoundly still, the kind of still that happens when a room collectively realizes, all at once, that it has fundamentally misread the situation it has been observing. Harold Voss is 67 years old, and he fills the doorway not because he is the tallest man who has ever entered it, though he is tall, but because of something that cannot be measured in height or breadth or the quality of his suit. It is the particular gravity of a man who has spent his entire life being absolutely certain of his ground, and whose certainty has always been justified by outcome. He wears a navy 3-piece suit, no tie. His silver hair is immaculate. His gray eyes, winter ocean, deep and cold and enormous, move through the courtroom with the calm efficiency of someone assessing a battlefield and finding the strategic picture entirely clear. He looks at his daughter. For one moment, just one, something moves across that formidable face. Something private and enormous and deeply paternal. A father's anguish at 6 weeks of watching his child stand alone in a room full of people who were trying to destroy her, because she asked him to wait, because she needed to know what she was made of, because Eleanor has always had more courage than was entirely reasonable. He is proud of her. It is visible in the brief compression of his mouth, the slight lift of his chin, the way his eyes hold hers across the length of the courtroom with something that looks like absolute and unconditional recognition. I see you. I have always seen you. I am here now. Then Harold Voss walks forward. Diana Cole has stopped moving. Her burgundy folder is suspended midway to the table, and it stays there, because Diana Cole is many things, brilliant, ruthless, meticulously prepared, but she is not, it turns out, prepared for this. Because Diana Cole knows that face. Everyone in the legal, financial, and corporate world who operates at a certain altitude knows that face. And Diana Cole is experiencing the particular internal horror of a woman who has just realized that the table she has been confidently and publicly kicking for 6 weeks is load-bearing. Richard Calloway turns. He turns because the stillness in the room has a direction, and the direction is behind him, and Richard Calloway's instincts, underneath all the performance, underneath the cufflinks and the manufactured sorrow and the armored contempt, his instincts are telling him. Something has gone catastrophically wrong. He turns and sees Harold Voss, and the color, the confident, smug, victorious color, leaves Richard Calloway's face. Not slowly, not gradually, like a light being switched off. He goes pale in the way that people go pale when something enormous and inevitable arrives, and they understand for the first time that they have been wrong about everything. Wrong about the fundamental nature of the situation. Wrong in a way that cannot be corrected or reframed or litigated away. His mouth opens, closes. His hand, the one that had been reaching for the pen to sign the final documents Diana had prepared, drops to the table. Margaret Calloway, in the front row of the gallery, has turned as well. Her platinum hair, her cream Chanel, her pearl-handled cane of theatrical authority, all of it is still. Her sharp gray eyes move from Harold Voss to Eleanor and back, and what moves across her face is not quite fear, but its elegant aristocratic cousin. The dawning comprehension that she has been catastrophically misinformed about who, exactly, she was dealing with. Harold reaches the plaintiff's table. He does not sit immediately. He stands beside his daughter and looks at her, and Eleanor looks up at him, and she says nothing, and he says nothing. And the entire courtroom watches this exchange that requires no words because it is written in something older and more fundamental than language. Then Harold Voss pulls out the chair beside his daughter and sits down beside Eleanor. For the first time in 6 weeks, Eleanor Voss-Kincaid is not alone at that table. The woman in the charcoal blazer, Eleanor's attorney, as it turns out, retained 3 weeks ago, but instructed to wait for exactly this moment, opens her briefcase and places a document at the center of the table. She looks at Diana Cole across the aisle with the professional serenity of someone who has just arrived at a card game where she knows every hand that's been dealt. She introduces herself to Judge Holt. Her name is Catherine Marsh. She is the former lead attorney of the Voss Group's International Legal Division. She has been practicing law for 22 years. She has never lost a case. Judge Holt looks over the rim of her glasses at the transformed plaintiff's table, at Harold Voss, at Catherine Marsh, at James Kincaid's forensic financial audit now being logged as evidence, at Oliver standing like a sentinel at the wall. at Constance Voss sitting in the front row of the gallery with both hands on her silver cane and the quiet, absolute satisfaction of a woman watching a chess game reached the exact position she foresaw 20 moves ago. The judge looks at all of this. She looks at Diana Cole. And very quietly, very professionally, she says, "Miss Cole, I think we'll take a 15-minute recess." In the marble corridor outside the courtroom, during the 15-minute recess, Richard Calloway discovers the specific quality of silence that exists inside total collapse. Diana Cole finds him near the windows at the end of the hall. She is already different. The precise, weaponized confidence has been replaced by something that looks uncomfortably like damage control. "Richard." Her voice is low, controlled, but beneath the control there is the sound of something structural failing. "Why didn't you tell me who she was?" Richard's jaw is tight, his cufflinks left, then right, but the gesture has lost its authority entirely. It is habit without meaning now, performance without audience. "I didn't think it was relevant," he says. And the sound of those words, "I didn't think it was relevant," lands between them like something dropped from a great height. He didn't think it was relevant. He had known Eleanor came from money. Old money. He had assumed her family's influence was regional at most, historical at best, the kind of inherited prestige that looks impressive in a drawing room but carries no real weight in a modern courthouse. He had assumed, and this assumption is the one that will unravel everything, that Eleanor's choice to stand alone was evidence of weakness rather than strategy. Diana closes her eyes, opens them. "Harold Voss," she says quietly. "Do you understand what that means?" Catherine Marsh alone, just the attorney, changes this case entirely. But Harold Voss sitting at that table means every piece of evidence we've submitted is going to be examined under a microscope. Every document, every signature, every. She stops, because she is looking at Richard's face, and she is seeing something she has never seen there before. Fear. Not the performance of concern. Not the calculated display of vulnerability he deploys when he needs sympathy. Actual, cold, bone-deep fear. The fear of a man who has been operating under a fundamental misapprehension about the nature of the game he was playing, and who is only now, too late, seeing the board clearly. Gerald Fitch appears at the far end of the corridor, phone pressed to his ear. He catches Richard's eye and gives a small, tight shake of his head. The expression on his face communicates, without words, that whatever calls he has been making during the recess are not going the way he expected, because word travels fast in certain circles. And in those circles, the news that Harold Voss has walked into the Harrington County Superior Court on behalf of his daughter, that Eleanor Voss has been quietly, methodically building her case for 6 weeks, while her family waited at precisely calibrated distance, this news is moving like electricity through copper wire. Inside the courtroom, Margaret Calloway has not moved from her seat, but the woman beside her, the old family friend, the one with too much perfume and too much satisfaction, has quietly stood, gathered her bag, and left. Without explanation. Without acknowledgement. Simply gone. And Margaret Calloway, sitting alone in the front row of the gallery she has occupied all day with such theatrical superiority, reaches up and adjusts her pearl earring with a hand that is not entirely steady. In the recess, Catherine Marsh presents Richard's legal team with a supplementary evidence package. It contains the complete forensic financial audit conducted by James Kincaid. It contains the 3 missing paragraphs from the letter Diana submitted as Exhibit 34, the paragraphs that reverse its meaning entirely. It contains a forensic handwriting analysis of the prenuptial agreement signature. It contains a great deal. When court resumes, Diana Cole's arguments, those precise, devastating, beautifully constructed arguments, begin to disassemble. not violently, with quiet, devastating precision. Like watching a building you were inside the whole time reveal, in broad daylight, that it was never structurally sound. And across the aisle, Eleanor Voss-Kincaid watches this with her hands folded on the table. Her father's solid, certain presence beside her, her grandmother's amber eyes at her back, and allows herself, for the first time, just the smallest, most private beginning of a smile. 3 weeks later, the judgment is issued. The Harrington County Superior Court finds in favor of Eleanor Constance Voss-Kincaid on all substantive counts. The prenuptial agreement is ruled inadmissible, the forensic analysis having confirmed signature forgery with a certainty that leaves no room for appeal. Eleanor's rightful share of Daniel Kincaid's estate is restored in full. Richard Calloway faces additional referral to the district attorney's office for document fraud. Diana Cole's firm quietly settles a separate matter with the state bar. Margaret Calloway is not in the courtroom for the verdict. Neither is Gerald Fitch. Eleanor stands outside the courthouse steps in the afternoon light, real light, the kind that falls on you like something you've been waiting for, and she is flanked by her father, her brother, her grandmother, and Catherine Marsh. A small, private cluster of people who represent everything she was told she didn't have. Harold puts his arm around her shoulders. He doesn't say anything grand. He says, "Lunch?" And Eleanor laughs, a real laugh, surprised out of her, bright and sudden and 3 months overdue, and leans into her father's side and says, "Yes." Somewhere with a very long wine list. Constance, beside them, taps her silver cane once on the stone step and says with absolute serenity, "I'll need a decent chair." Oliver catches Eleanor's eye over their grandmother's head and smiles, that rare, enormous, quiet smile he saves for moments that actually deserve it. Here is what Eleanor Voss-Kincaid's story teaches us. The depth of a person's support is not measured by how many people stand beside them in their most visible moments. It is measured by who is waiting, prepared, positioned, and absolutely certain for the moment their presence will matter most. Richard Calloway believed Eleanor was alone because he could see no one standing with her. He mistook her strategy for her situation. He mistook her restraint for her resources. He mistook her stillness for surrender. And this is the most expensive mistake a person can make about a woman who knows exactly who she is and exactly where she comes from. You never know whose daughter you are dealing with. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Question 1. If you were Eleanor, could you have held yourself together for 6 weeks of public humiliation, knowing your family was waiting, or would you have brought them in sooner? Question 2. At what moment did you feel the power shift most powerfully? When Harold walked in, when he sat beside her, or when the judgment was finally read? Question 3. Is there someone in your life who has stood quietly in the background while you fought your hardest battle? And what did their eventual presence mean to you? Share your answers in the comments below. I read every single one. If Eleanor's story moved you, if you believe that quiet dignity and hidden strength deserve to be celebrated, give this video your support. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they are never as alone as they appear. And subscribe to Karma's Heiress, where every week the right person gets exactly what they deserve. Until next time. She was never alone. She was simply waiting for the moment it would matter most.